Before we begin, I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight. I know how hard Msgr has worked on this. 53 years a priest, and he still gets anxious, caught up, nervous about speaking because he is a man, he's a believer, he's a priest who loves Jesus with all of his heart and all of his mind and all of his soul. And that love has been handed on to me as a priest, and I do pray and believe that will be handed on to each of us in our own way this evening. So I want to thank Msgr for being here and thank all of you for being here. We are live streaming this for those unable to attend physically, so you can share this. It will remain on YouTube for the next 90 days, but we are in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, and so we're here tonight to listen to the journeys of Jesus, the journeys of people like us who have loved him and served him.
Thank you, Father Kevin. That's a nice introduction. It reminds me of the story of reading the great pianist Arthur Rubinstein, one of the greatest ever. But he was always very clammy and got nervous and always prepared before his talk. And all priests, whenever they preach, should always be a little clammy. So please sit down. Make yourself at home as much as we can here at church. I'm just happy to be with you tonight. Happy, just a lot of people here on a Tuesday night, a cold, damp Tuesday night in December, as we come to prepare for Christmas in a spiritual way. I want to extend a welcome to all who join us online. We are online right now, and Father Kevin says that people will be able to he's just left, maybe they're not online quite yet. They are on whatever, and they'll be able to access, or others can access this. I have had a Zoom Mass starting right at the beginning of lockdown, which a friend of mine asked me to celebrate Mass on Zoom for his family. And then a week later, as you know, I lived in California for 10 years with a wonderful congregation there. So within a few weeks, we had 160 people on Zoom line, and it's continued, not every week. It continues on the first Sunday of every month, but even last week there were a little less than 50 screens, often with more than one person. So I sent out an email earlier saying that those from California are welcome to join us at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So hopefully some of our great community is there as well. I want to do three things tonight. I want to talk about Advent in general, Advent in the church, how we got to celebrate Christmas at this time of year and how Advent led up to that. Then I'd like to take a key for Advent for our reflection, and I'm going to go to the prophet Elijah, who's not known as, he was not a prophet of the Messiah, but he had an experience which is one of the definitive religious experiences in the Bible, and mention that. And then finally, to go to what we call the infancy narratives, the stories of the birth of Jesus, and we all know about them. They are on our mantelpiece, and we know them since we were kids. I'd like to reflect on them. In terms of journey, I've never read about this in anyone else, but it strikes me that everyone involved in the Christmas narrative is moving. And then I'd just like to offer one final reflection as well. Since I know how long I take for a Sunday homily, I have no idea how long this is taking. So I'm capable of chopping off parts of the body as we go through it. Advent. The word, as we know, means coming. The coming of Jesus as Messiah, birth in Bethlehem. The weight of the Jewish people for thousands of years, always for the Messiah, the one who would save them, the one who would bring in true worship, the one who would remove all enemies, and the one who would bring all people to the worship of the one God, as Jesus did. A universal faith, true worship, not in the temple, but in his body. And the enemy, the devil, is ultimately conquered. And then we have the waiting for Jesus at the end of time. Many of us, unless we are Jehovah's Witnesses, do not spend a lot of time worrying when that will happen. And of course, there's Jesus coming this Christmas. And this is the point of tonight's talk, how does God break into our lives? None of us is unimportant. So Advent is placed at the darkest time of the year. If this were June, it would be very bright outside. It's dark and has been dark for hours. It's cold. This morning might have been the coldest so far this year, and it will get colder. And the days are shorter. Sunrise doesn't happen, till 7:30 in the morning these days. And I thank God I don't live in Scotland. Over the centuries, this was a harrowing time of year for the ancients because they saw the God as a sun, and somehow the sun would move away into the horizon, and sacrifice needed to be made so that the sun god would not fall away indefinitely. And as we know, we depend on light, and we all depend on the sun as well. The ancient Romans, maybe around the year 250, 300, started adding another god to their pantheon, and it was the sun god. And they celebrated on what they thought was the solstice on December 25th. And they celebrated a feast which was very big around the time that Christians become legal through Constantine, around the year 325. They celebrated a feast of Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun. We don't know exactly when Jesus was born. There's many theories on how he came to December 25th. An early Christian writer said that Jesus died on the 25th of March, and therefore he must have been conceived on the 25th of I don't know how that works out. He died on the 25th of March, and so therefore the 25th of December, that doesn't work out to 9 months. But at any rate, there was a connection between his death and birth, and that's a theory that doesn't hold water. The early church just felt that great Roman holiday to the sun should be a holiday to Jesus Christ, the unconquerable sun, Son of light. I am the light of the world, Jesus says. Whoever believes in me will never walk in darkness. And so what a beautiful time of year to place the feast of the birth of Jesus Christ. We know that the most important Christian feast, the most important theologically, is certainly Easter. As St. Paul says, if Jesus is not raised from the dead, in vain is our faith. Everything depends on the fact that Jesus is raised to new life and shares that life with us. And we know the date of Easter. The early Christians did. It was during Passover. Sometimes it was a great discussion over which exactly date. Some early Christians wanted Easter celebrated on a Tuesday or a Thursday because that was the feast of the Passover. No, it was always celebrated at a time in which we celebrated the resurrection on a Sunday. But it's always sometime at the end of March to the middle of April. And then they added 40 days before that, a sacred number for the Hebrews. 40 always meant a period in which something important happened. 40 days, Jesus in the desert. 40 years, the Jews wandering through the Sinai. 40, a time in which something significant happened. And all Christians in the early church, in Rome at least, could not be baptized unless they participated in 40 days before Easter of going to Mass every day and teaching and so forth, and then they would be baptized at the Easter Vigil. Advent was added to Christmas as a time, it was a dark time anyway. It was a time in which food was a little scarcer. Originally there was some fasting involved, and it was 4 weeks, not 40 days. So this year, our Advent is 28 days preparing for Christmas. We celebrate Advent in a very interesting way in 2023, and we have in America for almost 150 years. The commercialization of Christmas. It started in the late 1800s when department stores in New York realized they had extra goods and merchandise and would put them on sale and you could give them as presents. And that's probably how it started, at least here in America. And it started in America, certainly before it did in other parts of the world as well. And then Santa Claus was co-opted in the 1920s by Coca-Cola, so we got to see who this was like. And everyone then knew about Santa Claus, just not the poem. And Kris Kringle, the movie, and so forth, until we are where we are today. I noticed something a couple of weeks ago. I mean, this sounds insane, but not only do we have Christmas gifts, we now have Advent gifts. You know, there are little, I've seen these years before, little toys for kids, in which is a little toy, and then there's a little segment about how we're preparing for the birth of Jesus. Well, this was something from Sephora. I'm sure all you women know about Sephora. I had to look it up. I have seen the shops all around the world. It's a French company. But Sephora has something for Advent, too, to help us prepare for the birth of Jesus. For $99, you're laughing because you probably own one. For $99, you can buy a Sephora Advent package. And for every day during Advent, you'll have a little container of a beauty product, a fragrance, a lotion, nail polish, to help prepare, I guess, for the birth of Jesus. I don't know what Mary would have thought on the way, about to have a child, going up to Jerusalem, thinking there will be women that will celebrate this event by putting on nail polish today. But then someone told me a few days ago, oh no, there's something else as well. It's called an Advent wine package, where you get a little vial of a different type of, you've all heard about this, I guess, you're all nodding your head. I hope none of you have gotten that. So you can reward yourself at Advent. You're worth it. I'm worth it. I need this nail polish. I need this Cabernet. And that's how I will celebrate the birth of Jesus. And there's an insanity to it. Although we all know that making our house beautiful at this dark time of year, preparing beautiful meals, and also gifts, beautiful gifts for those we love are important. And that's, I'm not dissing that at all. But how do we celebrate in this culture that we live in? We don't change a culture. We live in a culture. How do we develop our faith in that amid the hurry and the flurry of this time of year? I would like to read to you, if I may, a passage from the first book of Kings. It's a very early book in the Old Testament, one of the 6 or 7 books of history. It tells the history of the early kings and the early prophets of Israel. And this is about the prophet Elijah, who is and was the most popular prophet of all in Israel. That's why the Jews still, when they have Passover, they save a seat just in case Elijah will come. And he's the most popular because he never wrote a book. He worked miracles. He gave people life. He gave widows food. So he was exceptionally popular, certainly at the time of Christ. They often thought that Elijah, the Messiah, would be Elijah, come back again. But here's a story of Elijah. Elijah was in the northern kingdom of Israel. At that time, there were 2 kings of Israel. And he fought pagans. There was a revival of paganism. And the king and the queen of the northern kingdom of Israel encouraged that. And the king was wicked Ahab. And the queen, we all know her name with evil, was Queen Jezebel. And they despised Elijah. And so they forced him out. They tried to kill him. And he walked for 40 days and 40 nights and reached a point in which he would not eat. Deep depression. He wanted to die, almost suicidal. He just felt his life was useless. And an angel appeared to him and gave him water and bread and said, no, you must rise because there is a journey ahead you must make. And he gets up and he goes to Mount Horeb, another name for Mount Sinai. He's the only person in the Old Testament that ever visited that great sacred spot of Mount Sinai. And so he went up there expecting, as Moses, for example, there was clouds, lightning, thunder, all sorts of miraculous weather miracles when Moses was on Mount Sinai. But something happens almost in the history of religion here. Let me read this. Then the Lord said to Elijah, "Go out," he's on Mount Sinai, "and stand on the mountain before me. The Lord will pass by." There was a strong and violent wind rending the mountains and crushing the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a light, silent sound. Sometimes that's translated as silence. A light, silent sound. When he heard this, Elijah hid his face in his cloak. He experienced God in something utterly insignificant, a silent voice. St. John of the Cross, one of our greatest Catholic mystics, often talked about the experience of God as silent music. The same thing as we have here with Elijah. Silent music. There's nothing to be heard, and yet there's harmony. I think this particular passage represents a new moment in faith in which there are no mountains shaking or Red Seas parting. The experience of faith is often an experienced communally with other people. This is the story. God acts in surprising ways. There's no miracle. God acts in surprising times. When he is most depressed, perhaps suicidal, God is there. It's the story of Christmas, which we'll look at shortly. It's the story of Nazareth, nothing town. Remember, Philip went to Nathanael and said, "I want to introduce you to Jesus of Nazareth." Nazareth? Anything good ever come out of Nazareth? Yes, Jesus. A teenage girl by the name of Miriam in Hebrew, a nobody. Yet National Geographic a few years ago had a cover story, Christmas story, on her, the most powerful woman on earth. Miriam, a nobody. And it's the story of the cave, the stable cave, no palace, not even a home where he is born. He will die on a cross, surrounded by some, but the city of Jerusalem was packed with Passover tourists, and most did not even notice. And there was a surprise, too, as there was in Bethlehem. He rose from the dead, and the world changed. The story of Christmas is the story really that's contained in what we call the infancy narratives. There's 4 chapters that deal with the birth of Christ. I mentioned this in the homily on Sunday. The first 2 chapters in the Gospel of Luke, and the first 2 chapters in the Gospel of Matthew. St. John wants to take a more cosmic view, and he says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." But the others deal with little Bethlehem as well. By the way, if anyone ever wants to follow up, there's Pope Benedict, as Pope, wrote 3 books on Jesus. He combines the deepest scholarship, and he's always utterly readable. He's probably the only one of the 206. He was the greatest of the 266 popes as a theologian, as a thinker. And to read his works, it's quite readable. But his smallest of the 3 volumes is called Jesus of Nazareth, the Infancy Narratives. And it's about 150 pages. It's not a cartoon, but it's if you want something to bite into during Advent. And by the way, you can get it on Kindle. I checked it yesterday, $1.50 on Kindle. So even if you don't finish it, it's not a waste of money. All the narratives ask 2 questions, ultimately. And you're thinking maybe of the Magi presenting Jesus in the temple, Mary visiting Elizabeth, all of them, they ultimately ask two questions. Who is this child? Who is this child? We have that great Christmas carol, "What child is this?" One of the beautiful things we have, really, part of our tradition, is the English carols. They tell the whole story if you listen to all of them. Father Kevin and I were having dinner tonight, and I have a whole list of carols, and I put them on shuffle, and one after another. It's the story. Beautiful, beautiful lyrics and beautiful music. What child is this? The first question. The second question is, where does he come from? Where does he come from? That will be a question that will be asked of Jesus right before he dies. He's before Pilate, and Pilate is trying to find out who he is. Are you a king? They're claiming you're a king. My kingdom is not of this world. So you are a king. I've come to witness to the truth. No kingdom of this world, a kingdom of the truth. And then Pilate, the Romans were ultimate cynics. What is truth? But then again, he comes back to Jesus again, and it says in the Gospels he's afraid because he knows Jesus is innocent, but he also knows he's not quite what he thinks he is. And he says to him, "Who are you? Who are you?" And so the question that's asked in the beginning is the question that is asked at the very end. And it's the question that each of us in our own ways needs to answer. It's an exceptionally personal question. And Jesus will say this in the Gospels to the apostles. Who do you say that I am? And the way that you define that is the way that you will live your life, your faith life. You are a teacher. You're a great ethical teacher. Or you're this or that. Or in the words of St. Thomas, what we call the doubter, the apostle, my Lord and my God. So the stories in the Gospels are overtures. It's been said by many scripture scholars that the little stories of Christmas that you tell your kids or your grandkids around the creche, the whole gospel is included in those. Andrew Greeley, maybe some of you might know him, he died about 10 years ago. He's a famous Catholic sociologist, a pain in the neck for the American bishops in many ways. He was a great critic, but he was a very good sociologist, and he was one of the people that said, by the way, that Catholic education, elementary education and secondary education, makes a huge difference on the Catholics that they produce. But he also said that the whole faith is contained in that little creche. Every family should have a creche, a stable with figures, 10, 12, 15. You know, in Italy, you go to those big churches. Sometimes there are hundreds of figures and running water and lights and all of that. And it dazzles kids, and they're able to understand the story of Jesus, especially if parents tell them individual by individual statue what that means. We breathe, my friends, at this Christmas time, and I'll get here into a little bit of theology 101 and then I'll move to the story. But it's important to understand our Catholic faith. Catholic faith lives on symbols and sacraments. And by sacraments, I mean several things. There's big S, baptism, Eucharist, laying on of hands, ordination, marriage, that are acts of Jesus. I can be a great sinner and celebrate Mass, but it's an act of Jesus, not an act of myself. But then there are other sacraments as well, and this is what I mean, that Catholicism is a sacramental faith. We live our faith in many ways because we believe by what we see and hear and touch and smell that God is in the ordinary. Elijah, a simple, silent voice. God is in the ordinary. He's in creation. The first sacrament of God was the creation of the universe. That's how he shows himself. The ultimate sacrament of God, beyond Eucharist and baptism, is Jesus himself. He is the sacrament, the primary sacrament of God. And so we live that out in our Catholic faith. We're not afraid of what's seen and touched and smelled. Statues, windows, stained glass windows. hearing music, touching water, smelling incense, vestments and candles, Advent wreaths, colors, purple, green, gold, signs of the cross, standing, kneeling, Good Friday, prostrating on the ground as well, kissing the altar, kissing the book at the end of reading the gospel. I mean, we forget, and even beforehand, the gospel, people don't realize it, but we touch. We touch our minds, we touch our hearts. That touching reminds us we want God as part of our mind, our speaking, our hearts, and our love. I mean, that infuses what's called it's often the Catholic imagination. The Catholic imagination. That's one of the reasons why when the Pilgrims first arrived in Plymouth Colony, they forbade Christmas. It was too, quote, Roman, popish. Christmas was always associated because it was a lot of celebration, and they were against that. They were into wearing black and just listening to the Bible. But Catholics accept sacramentally the reality that God speaks to us through everything that is good. And so we celebrate Christmas with presents, with light, with cake and turkey and wine and all of that. All of that is part of God wants us to celebrate creation. By the way, the Pilgrims got over that within a couple of generations. And if you look at even at Protestant churches today, I mean, the idea that you would have a creche 50 years ago would have been unacceptable in most Protestant churches. Not today. But then 50 years ago, Catholics would have not lived the scriptures as we do today. So there's been a great ecumenical, in many ways, approaching one another. Maybe to sum up, a line from St. Ignatius of Loyola. He says that we are called to see God in all things. To see God in all things. If you've ever been to a Jesuit college, you've heard that many, many times. Or as Gerard Manley Hopkins, the great 19th century Victorian Jesuit poet, wrote, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God." So part of entering into this season of Advent is seeing things differently, even in the dark. So the infancy narratives are stories. I'm going to put it this way tonight, and I'm sure other people have mentioned it, although I don't know anyone that's put it. The stories of the infancy of Jesus are stories of journeys. Everybody's moving. Long journeys, short journeys, fearful journeys, exhausting journeys, joyful journeys. They flee, they search, they visit, and ultimately they discover. At the end of almost all of these journeys, there's a discovery. But you need to journey first, and then you will discover. Well, the first journey is around 10. I'll move through these quickly. The first journey is the journey of God. God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to Joseph by the name of Miriam. So the first journey is the journey of God, and he often uses, in all of, certainly the Old Testament, angels to convey his will. But he's there in the presence of the angel as well, Gabriel. God takes the initiative. That's the story of the Bible, but that's the story of our lives as well. When something happens in your life where you feel God's already acting. We are always the one to respond to God. Just as God broke into the life of Abraham and Moses, they both respond, Abraham, Abraham. And before the burning bush, Moses, Moses. And they both respond, here I am, here I am. And of course, with the angel, Mary responded, behold the handmaid of the Lord. She didn't understand what was happening. Luke tells us she was deeply troubled. But she doesn't say, well, I don't get it, but I'll go along. No. Behold the handmaid of the Lord. She's there wholehearted. The second journey is a journey of solidarity and hospitality. It says Mary gets up right away in haste and travels into the hill country of Judea. 70, 90 miles upland. And she goes to visit Elizabeth, her cousin, who's pregnant. And both women, by the way, it's the only time in the New Testament where two women meet one another. And both are pregnant, and both have an unusual, mysterious pregnancy. And Mary spends time with her 6 months, not only praying, but also cleaning up and all the things that need to be done as well. And of course, it's there that Mary gives her great Magnificat. We don't know if Mary was literate or not. Most women in little villages were not. Men sometimes were, because Jewish men almost insisted in reading the script. Reading was very important to the Jewish people. And we know Jesus could read. He read in the synagogue. To Mary, we don't know, but she knew Scripture. In the Magnificat, she makes a collage of different quotes from the Old Testament. Especially, it's a program of the weak shall win over the strong. God has scattered the proud in the conceit of their hearts. He's knocked down the mighty from their thrones, and the rich he has sent away empty. It's a program that God is going to come to the help of those like Mary who are poor and insignificant. And then, of course, the center story, as we all know, is Bethlehem. It's a journey of obedience to Roman law, to fulfill the census. Romans were not big into demography, but they were big into collecting taxes. And if they had the census, they could collect the taxes. Romans, in some ways, were very relatively benign occupiers. They allowed people to practice their own religion, their own business, and so forth. But if you ever fought the Romans, or you ever were a threat, like you might be the king of Israel, they would come down on you immediately. As they came down on Jerusalem in the summer of 70 AD, after a group of Jewish rebels, had killed a whole number of Romans. And the Romans waited 4 or 5 years, and they came and they destroyed Jerusalem, killing hundreds of thousands of Jews and scattered them. And there was never another sacrifice in the temple after the years, August 70 AD. But at the time of Joseph and Mary, they were obedient, and they went to fulfill the census. We could talk a lot about what happens there in Bethlehem. I love that. I preached that on that Sunday. No room for you in the inn. No room for you. I love that. Not only because in 3rd grade I was the innkeeper in the pageant and dramatically shut the door. And I've been paying for that ever since. But, and then they went, there's no room for them, then they went to those caves. We do know from archaeology that there were always lots of caves that were often used as stalls for animals as well. So that's known. And then, of course, you have the ox and the donkey. How do they fit in? They're not mentioned here. But Isaiah has in the beginning, the first chapter of Isaiah, ox knows its, O Israel, the ox knows its owner, and the donkey knows the manger of its master, but you do not know me. And everything is turned around at the birth of Christ. And there you have the little donkey, and there you have the ox, and with big eyes always, gazing on Jesus, because they recognize him as their owner and their master. And the little donkey and the little ox represent each of us. After 40 days, Mary and Joseph make another journey of obedience to Jewish law. You shall take your firstborn son and bring him and offer him to the Lord, because the firstborn of the Egyptians was sacrificed so that you might live. That firstborn male, it was sexist, firstborn male was offered to God, and they bought him back with 2 little turtle doves, which would be sacrificed. Another journey, the 5th journey, is a journey of escape from Herod. Herod's the only one that doesn't make a pilgrimage or move. He sits on his chair and watches what goes on. No journey from him at all. Herod, we know, is one of the most paranoid rulers ever in the Holy Land. Herod's Herod was very close with the Roman emperors, Nero, and the family was very intertwined with the highest level, and they were educated in Rome. And also Herod did not pay tax. So as a result, he had a great number of benefits from the Romans, one of which was because he didn't pay tax, he could build great buildings. And he rebuilt, over 40 years, the great temple in Jerusalem, which is 35 acres. And it's called the Temple Mount now. There's nothing there. The Romans totally destroyed it. But you get an idea. If you ever walk through the Roman Forum, it looks small. If you walk through the temple expanse in Jerusalem, it's massive. And he was a great, great builder, but paranoid. He had 2 sons he both killed because he thought they were after his throne. He killed his first wife, Miriam. He had 7 other wives. And the family is worth a sitcom, or at least a reality show. He killed his brother-in-law. He killed his wife's grandfather. He was a very brutal. So the idea of the killing of the children in Bethlehem absolutely fits in with his personality. So Mary and Joseph, warned by an angel, whatever that means, however that takes place, they go to Egypt. For centuries, Jews who had been persecuted went out of the Holy Land into Egypt. By the time that Jesus was born, by the way, there were more Jews living outside of Palestine. They were living all over the place because of the persecutions they had experienced. And so Joseph and Mary head out to Egypt. Large Jewish community there. You know what I've just realized over the past few weeks? There was only one road from the Holy Land into Egypt. You know where that goes through? Gaza. The road to Egypt, and they've always gone down to Egypt and back. There was just one road. It's still the road that they use, I presume, on the highways through Gaza. And I was thinking of that the other day, that, as people are suffering, Jesus and Mary and Joseph walked over that very, very area. A journey of escape and suffering. There's finally the journey home. The angel appears to Joseph, it's safe. And they make a journey. And the reward of that journey is normalcy. They set up home in Nazareth. And so for 30 years they live there. Jesus lives there. And he watches day in and day out human goodness, human stupidity, human generosity, human struggling. He watches. He mustn't have done anything important there, because we hear in the Gospels, they said, people in Nazareth say to him, where did he get all this? He hadn't shown anything, supposedly, in 30 years, until he breaks into the Jordan River, and at that point the public life begins. But we're just dealing with the private life of Jesus right now. Then there's 2 other journeys, which I won't go into at length, but they're really interesting. The journey of the shepherds and the journey of the Magi. The shepherds were Jews, but Jews looked down on them because they couldn't keep the law. They lived in the fields. They didn't wash. They didn't keep the law. So they were Jews, but they were peripheral Jews. They were on the margins. And those are the first Jews that met Jesus. And then, of course, the Magi. That's a whole lecture in itself. They follow the stars. The shepherds had an angel. In other words, they had Jewish tradition and faith. The Magi, probably Zoroastrian folks who were a combination of doctors, astronomers, and other things as well. We're not quite sure what they were. In the Middle East at the time of Jesus, they had reputations of being crooks. So that also adds to another group of people that are not perfect coming to Jesus, but they're seeking him out. And then they get lost and they meet Herod. And then the light appears. And Bethlehem's only 5 miles away from Jerusalem. And it reminds us often on very long journeys of life, we can never find what we're looking for. And really the answer is closer than you could possibly believe, 5 miles away. And so these little shepherds and these Magi, they were not kings. That's taken from Isaiah, where it says, kings will come to you from afar. I sort of see them as it's very spiritual hippies, young people that are coming that are really searching, but that's my own. We can often have many different takes on this. You know, in art, they're always seen as kings. You know, the Medici Chapel has them as kings with an entourage of hundreds of people. Herod would never have allowed that. And of course, all the kings in the Medici Chapel happen to look like the Medicis themselves. We build these stories often as we want because they allow us to. And finally, there is the journey of discovery, the last part of the infancy narratives. At 12 years of age, Jesus is lost in the temple. Mary and Joseph leave, thinking he's part of, people always travel in caravans. They come back and they find him in the temple. He's 12 years old, probably just received bar mitzvah, a young man. And the first words of Mary to Jesus, I love this, is a question. Son, did you not know that your father and I were looking for you? It's not like, holy, 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 I know you are the Son of God. No, why have you done this to us? That often having Jesus in your life causes issues. That's why some people don't want to give themselves up to the faith, because we're afraid that Jesus will ask too much of us. I don't want that. I want to believe in you, but I'm afraid if I become too religious, you'll ask too much of me. And Jesus responds, he's already a rabbi. Rabbis always answer questions with questions. Did you not know that I needed to be about my Father's business? That word also means house. I mean, he said house, but it can also mean my Father's work as well. And then it said he went home and was obedient to them, grew strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon them. What do these journeys say to us? We're all going through a journey of life, but we're also, each of us, going through particular journeys that often people sort of close to you don't even have an idea of. We never know what other people are dealing with in their hearts. The first thing I think these stories say to us is listen. Listen, God is speaking in silent sound. If you're expecting a tornado or an earthquake, it often doesn't happen. Sometimes it happens when there's a death in a family or something like that. But that's hard to figure out in those traumas. God often speaks to us most forcefully in silence. The second thing is to obey. The story of the infancy narratives is everyone who hears obeys. The Magi's get up from maybe Persia. The shepherds get up. They're probably asleep. Mary gets up. Joseph gets up. Everyone gets up. Anna, the beautiful story of little Anna and Simeon when they present Jesus. They had been waiting in the temple. Simeon said he would not die until he had seen the Messiah of God. Anna came every day to the temple. They never gave up. They obeyed. That's the story of them all. And somehow it is the story of each of our lives. And finally, it's a story of trust, that we are all part of God's plan, not only the macro plan, but there is a plan for each one of our lives. Theologians call it the theodrama, the God drama in our life, that God has a plan for us. Our lives are not significant, but Mary's wasn't before the angel. She was nobody. We're nobodies. And yet God has a plan for us, that we can do something and be something for other people as well. To see God in all things. Let me end with a story about seeing God in Advent. There was a man who was very depressed and went to God, and he needed things of God. He said, God, speak to me. And a beautiful lark sang, and he did not hear it. God, speak to me, and a thunder rolled over his head, and he didn't listen. God, let me see you, and a star shone brightly, but he did not recognize it. God, show me a miracle. A child was born, and he did not notice. Oh God, please touch me and let me know you are here. And with that, he brushed a butterfly from his sleeve. It reminds us, my friends, God is always around. In the little things and the simple things we take for granted. But God always meets us on his terms, and we need to make that leap of faith. My dear friends, don't miss out on the blessings of God this Christmas, because they are not prepackaged as we expect. Listen to that silent music, and we will hear, and it can change our lives as it changed the lives of all who took those journeys to find Jesus. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Father Kilgore is in charge now.
Divine praises. Blessed be God. As we conclude, I want to thank all of you for being here, but I want to thank in particular Sister Mary, who maybe it's been a year and a half. We asked her to lead a speaker series, and she's just brought in tremendous people. I'm partial to Msgr, but she's just brought in tremendous people, and she's here every week. She's such a humble, obedient lover of God. And so I want to thank Sister. Anything we've asked of her, she has done beyond measure. So thank you for taking the initiative. And we all know if Sister Mary, certainly the priests know, if she asks for something, we will do it. And so we are thankful and we are grateful for you, Sister Mary, thankful for all of you. We hope you have a great, great Advent.